Hi, good morning. Welcome to SportWorks Talks. My name's Christian Page, and with me today is Geert Hendricks and Neil Beecroft. Good morning, guys. How are you both?
Good morning. Very well, thank you.
Good morning.
Great to have you both on. So greetings to everybody. I see that we've got lots of attendees from all different parts of the world that's joining us this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you are in the world. Really important topic, this one. And I really believe you'll enjoy the presentation that Neil and Geert have put together for us today. So I'm going to hand over to them. And then what I would ask is that if you've got questions, please put them in the chat, and then we'll come to those at the end of the presentation. Presentation runs for about 20 minutes, and then we will do some Q&A, because I'm no doubt there'll be plenty of good questions and answers. All right, enjoy. Over to you guys.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian. Thank you, SportWorks, for having us, and thank you all who are listening or watching to this this podcast. Just want to quickly run you through an introduction. Probably we can get some of the slides on the screen, but the agenda for today consists of a couple of things. Firstly, we will briefly speak to you about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, in case you haven't heard about that. We'll introduce to you the SDGs Sport Lab and familiarize yourself a bit more with BCorp. You might know it, you might not know it at all, but I think it's an important concept to be familiar with in the context of today's discussion. Then the SDG Action Manager, a concrete tool, followed by a brief debate, because it's Q&A for us. It's like a debate on how the SDGs and BCorp are opportunities to sustain the sport event sector. So just a quick introduction. Geert Hendricks, my name. I'm the co-founder and currently CEO of Sport and Sustainability International, SandSI, and also a director at Blueshift Solutions. Having worked in the world of the Olympic movement for quite some time, really passionate about this theme, as many of you might know. So voilà, that's about it for me. Handing over to Neil, probably a bit about yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. Neil Beecroft, so former head of sustainability at Lausanne 2020, worked before at UEFA in bidding committees for the Olympic Games, and recently become a BCorp leader, so trying to bring sustainability within the industry, and now bridging both together, so sports and business innovation. Also co-founder of SandSI, and looking forward to today's presentation. So maybe as a first question to you all, 1 month ago, the world changed, the world of sports changed. Is it, according to you, the beginning of the end or the start of a new beginning? And just to recap, to see how the world was before it started to change, we have a small video coming.
Yeah, a lot of things can happen in a few weeks, and I do still remember, and I hear very often sport leaders saying, like, I'm in charge of my sport, I'm not in charge of saving the world, so why should I care about this? And something that I wanted to probably share here is, like, the earth doesn't need the sport needs the earth. So if we see what's happening right now in the current crisis, having no strategy as a sport to address the impact of social, environmental, or health issue, it's no longer an option for an event. I don't know about your strategy and opinion for esports, for example, but the current crisis has been accelerating esports, and your athletes who are normally competing in live events are now competing against each other at esports. How do you adapt as a sport to the world that is changing? We are not Superman carrying the earth, but we have to make sure that we are prepared to not being crushed by the earth. Neil, you wanted to share something about a piece of research that you shared with me recently, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, so this was a study done by WWF during London 2012. And what it showed was that if there was no event, so in yellow, business as usual would mean we would consume always more and we would produce always more. So society would always have a bigger impact. And in red would be an event which would be non-sustainable. So there's a peak during event time, and then we go back to normal. In green would be an event which always has an impact and has a peak, but which is lower than an event which has no sustainability strategy. And the interesting aspect with an event that thinks about sustainability, thinks about legacy, then it leaves to society good practices, which enables to reduce consumption and reduce production, maybe through circular economy or best practices, public transport, which remains within the city and within some of the sports organizations. So if we do a quick parallel with today's events during the corona crisis, will we go back to business as usual? Will we have a peak where we consume like crazy once we're free again in a certain way, unleashed? Or will we have a moment, of course, where we all get back together, but then we put in place best practices and good practices that we've thought about, that we learned, and that will ensure that as of today, society goes towards better practices. If we go to the next slide, what's interesting to see within the financial sector is that some of the most resilient and most advanced businesses are the ones that are handling better the current financial crisis. So there's a direct parallel between ESGs, environmental social governance funds, and how they've managed to be resilient to the current crisis. In sports, it's a bit more difficult to do, to study whether those organizations that have the best sustainability practices will handle better the crisis. But I think it's an interesting parallel to think about, whether those ones that have already taken a couple of steps will be those that will develop new models and be able, for instance, to integrate better the community and to build new models for the years to come. So now is the moment where we ask you the questions. Do we keep wanting to have the head in the sand as ostriches, or do we want to be the eagles? And there I've been using an example of BCorp, Lombard-Odier, which before the crisis asked themselves this question, have become BCorp, and we have a short video to see what they were saying before the crisis, and it could actually well be still topical now. So next video, please.
The world of business is breaking apart. On one side are the ostriches, heads in the sand, creatures of the past, living on hope that the future won't come to pass. But the inevitable always does. On the other side, the eagles, decisive and soaring, They see above it all far-sighted companies with the ability to see beyond today and even beyond tomorrow. The future belongs to them, for our world is changing. Our economy is changing. We are in the midst of a sustainability revolution, a revolution that will affect everyone and everything on the planet, and one only the eagles can win. We believe in eagles, and our role on behalf of our clients is to find them. Will you ignore the eagles or invest in them? Rethink sustainability. Rethink investment. Rethink everything. Lombard Odier.
Good. So back to screen sharing. Now is the moment where we have some time to use some creativity to innovate, to keep a critical spirit on how we got there and what roles can we develop now through collaboration in order to go beyond the current situation. I do believe that we need more authenticity and sustainability. Companies will now have to report, have to show progress, and will have to develop new models. Same thing within the sports organizational model. And these are tools that currently Geert and I will try to introduce today, and how we can go the next step further, and what existing tools can we use to build and to sustain the next sports organization model.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. I don't know if we can do a raise of hand if there's anyone who has never heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's a roadmap. It's agreed between the 205 United Nations member states, really to define sustainability. If you want to know what sustainability means, actually it means these 17 things. And we've spoken about it before, as SandSI, as a language that you need to learn to speak to your partners, to your sponsors, to basically to all your stakeholders in the sport, but also to give a certain structure to the work you're doing as a federation. And if we move on to the next slide, you can ask yourself, okay, all good and well, Neil, but who is actually bothering about sustainability, especially now, given the current situation? Well, here's a couple of corporates that actively publicly report on their progress related to the Sustainable Development Goals. There might be some of your sponsors actually in this list. And in addition, a lot of football fans, I saw a recent study, 83% of the football fans in the United Kingdom, they care about how their club is addressing the environment. And if you want to say, okay, but I'm really working for my athletes, well, I'll give you another study and then I'll stop the scientific piece. But 64% of athletes, was shown by a study among college athletes in the United States, who are currently not involved in any work related to sustainable development, indicated that they want to be involved. So it's also an opportunity to connect with your athletes, with your sponsors, and with your fans on this topic. Now, the question in the next slide that we always get is like, how does this work? Because it's all good and well, but I have no idea how to start this. I've listed a few examples here, and you have my email address at the end. I'm happy to share more details about you, but a lot of these details are available on the respective websites of the organizations that I mentioned here. You want to start simple? Take the Tennis Federation, Roland Garros. They have a full day where they encourage able-bodied visitors to try out wheelchair tennis and to be more sensitive to the accessibility issue that many people who are paralyzed facing when they are going to sport events. You want to be something more innovative? The Johan Cruyff Arena, they are host to the Smart City Incubation Lab, and they serve as a test location to accelerate development and market introduction of sustainability initiatives, safety and security measures, transportation, digital connectivity. They are a host of a whole lab, a whole incubation lab as a sport event. Are you in football, hockey, golf? I don't know which sport you represent, who is on this call, but a sport that uses a lot of water. Learn from our friends in the United States, from the NFL team Denver Broncos. They have a water budget, which I think is fascinating. not just a financial budget and how you spend your money, but they have a water budget to monitor closely how much water they spend. And actually they saved $60,000 per year through introducing this initiative. Another one closer to home for some of us, the FIVB, for example, putting innovation and engagement together. If you want to have something engaging, take the nets from the ocean, the fishing nets. It's one of the biggest pieces of waste that arrives up in the ocean. And they work together with some environmental groups to transform them into volleyball nets. And another way that we can do now is the International Bobsled and Skeleton Federation. This is actually an example that was documented by the IUC, who has been diligently documenting these case studies for the last 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. And on their website, you can find at least 75 examples of international sport federations addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. And I just picked out this one because I thought it's interesting to see, and it might be relevant in the current context of the Corona crisis, because all our event calendars are upside down. We have to redesign them. We have to rethink them. What they did already a long time ago, before it was necessary, is they looked at their calendar and they made some changes to save on transport, to make the transport of the staff, the jury staff, for example, that travels to competition, more efficient. They saved 25% in a travel cost. And we don't even talk about the amount of carbon they save by addressing one of the biggest issues in sustainability, being transport. So here's a few examples, but as I said, like there's many others, but I just wanted to give some concrete ideas on what it means to work on sustainable development goals as sport organizations. And on the next slide, you can see something that we mentioned before, the SDGs Sport Lab. It is an initiative that SandSI has kicked off a week ago, where we said we would like to build a creative platform to encourage, share, and support concrete initiatives that use sport to contribute to the UN SDGs. It's a platform. It's a way to really bring these things together, to connect the dots, and to share what's already out there. So it's something that I really encourage you to find out more if you would like to learn and you would like to have some more best practices. Now, doing a little pitch, since Neil and I are both representing SandSI here, and in case you don't know SandSI yet, very briefly, SandSI is a Swiss NGO that has 3 big goals that we're working towards for 2030. Climate, waste, and health. That's what we're working on with specific programs, specific actions like the SD Sport Lab. And another program is Football for Climate, really focusing more on the football industry. But those are the 3 key topics SandSI is working on. And we are a membership organization, as you can see on the next slide. We are open to sport and non-sport entities. Currently, we have members from NGOs, from event organizers, clubs, companies, leagues, and international federations, but also athletes and para-athletes. So it's a diversity of people that we try to bring together, as we say, to accelerate sustainability in and through sport. That is what SandSI stands for, and that's what we strive for. So far, the commercial. I suggest we move forward and we go to the next topic, and let's talk about sex. Neil?
Well, sustainability being a big topic, even more at the moment. So there's a lot of people thinking about it, but there's actually less people doing it, and those who are doing it are sometimes doing it very badly. So how do we really engage? We've seen the SDGs as the overarching tool that we can use and align ourselves within the world of sports. The world of sports being currently the core, so we have major sports organizations. This core is being currently shaken, but is still there, is the body, and has some regulations, has some governance, but is looking into innovate. We have to innovate because definitely we will have to adapt once the crisis starts to come, and we will have to change. And how will we do it? We will have to have a strong collaboration between front runners, those are already looking at new ideas, but keeping the core strong. And if we don't have both, I do believe that we will break down. And if we cannot break the rules. We have to make the rules. So how do we make the rules? If we look at the B Corp model, B Corp looked at before companies, businesses were looking at shareholder value, and now evolving towards stakeholder value. Likewise for sports, if we include our stakeholders or community or fans or sponsors within how we will design the future sports, this is how we will have strong roots, and will be more resilient. Examples of B Corps: Patagonia within sports. We have sports agencies as well. B Corp being for profit. There are companies within the world of sports. Organizations also have their side companies. So it's interesting to look how B Corp could influence sports organization. Why? Is by looking at its governance, workers, community, environment, and customers. So it's a bit of a framework which we can add underneath all the related initiatives in terms of sustainability. If we take some of the most major sports organizations, each of them has good governance, compliance. Each of them now have human rights. They have a foundation. They have CSR. They have sustainability. And the problem with that is within the organization, they have various silos that all kind of compete against each other. And there's no kind of synergies, direct synergies between them, because all of them are doing amazing work. Their foundation, their CSR, their sustainability campaigns, even their communication division, department are doing CSR campaigns. And with the B Corp model, there's an opportunity to have an umbrella that brings all of these initiatives within the most major sports organizations together. And for those who start, they can follow framework and inspire themselves from the B Corp measurement. And to conclude, B Corp have united with the Global Compact. Some sports federations also and already engage with the UN Global Compact on their supply chain, notably on human rights, etc., and with the B Lab in order to translate SDGs for business. But this is also something we could look for sports organization. So to conclude, Geert?
Yeah, to conclude, we've spoken about a lot of things, but do you want to be Superman, Superwoman, carrying the world? Good luck. Or do you want to address the current issues and to develop a strategy that really helps you adapt to your current situation? Do you want to use this as an opportunity to innovate, or do you really see the struggle of the currently only as problems? Secondly, you want to be an ostrich or an eagle. It's a choice that you make, how you want to react, how you want to behave. Do you see it opportunistic, or do you put your head in the sand? The tools are there. We don't expect that you've understood everything or you remember everything that we said in this webinar, but we just wanted to say that with SDGs, with B Corp, etc., all the tools are available to support you. There's an awful lot to learn from other sport organizations, from non-sport organizations who often have made steps on this that the sport industry hasn't made yet. So get out there, get in touch with us if you want to know some of the best kids in class, so to say, but do address it and think about your role and how you can use this to really sustain your sport in the long run. So having said all of that, I suggest we move forward to our next part of the
now
and take some questions.
Now's the moment to rethink society. It's probably our last chance, or we could call it a last opportunity. So the floor is open. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the questions.
Christian.
Great. Yeah, great presentation, guys. Some really great food for thought. You're covering a big topic in 20 minutes, so well done. And we've got some great questions coming through from the guests. I think the first one we'll start here with from Greta Avila. Hi, Greta. In a few words, could you outline the financial benefits to the, I guess, the context of what we're discussing here this morning? That's the question. To organizations.
So if we look at, for instance, social entrepreneurship looks at investing $1 and what is the return on investment of that dollar that is being spent. So if we think about sports organization and having this social entrepreneurship drive, is, do they want to invest $1 and or do they want to invest $1 and potentially gain more at the end by developing community programs, by having CSR campaigns, by having a more engagement towards stakeholders? And that's maybe how we can think further is, do they want to stay stuck in their business mindset, or do they want to have a more inclusive approach, which then means more resilience and more roots building?
Yeah, I guess there's a follow-on to that as well. The follow-up question, it's saying from Sydney Chen, what is the main driving forces that from your experience, that motivates IIFs to become sustainable? And what are the benefits? And he's also asking the financial benefits from a sport federation perspective.
I mean, international federations, they exist to develop their sport, to grow their sport. So that is the driver. So that's why I hope we made that clear, that you need to integrate it into your, I mean, we don't really talk much about business models within international federation, but it is the model, how you run your federation, how you develop your sport, and integrating it in there to develop your sport is something that is crucial. Let me give you an example that I know from the NHL, the hockey league in the United States. They have an approach where they say, if, for example, we take measures to reduce the amount of electricity, we put the lights down slightly in our ice rink, we save cost there. By saving cost, we can reduce the entry cost for someone to participate in hockey. A kid on the hockey pitch means, they know from statistics, comes with 2 fans, often the parents or someone else, which means 6 more eyeballs or 3 more people in your fan base, which means a bigger fan base behind your sport. You need to connect the dots. You can't see it in isolation. If you just talk about a specific element without connecting it to your bigger goal as a sport, it's going to be very difficult, I think, to defend to your management board. But it also will be much more difficult to measure in means of impact. But connecting them to your overall goal as federation to develop your sport is something that is crucial.
Yeah, and if I may as well, looking at the governance side, the IOC has been playing a major role in pushing its international federations towards more sustainability, and not only pushing them, but providing a lot of knowledge, doing a lot of workshops, and putting a lot of best practices out there. So as an organization as well, they play a great role in sharing knowledge and pushing their IFs towards more sustainability practices.
Yeah, and that kind of segues into the next question, which is from Michelle. You know, some organizations are born with DNA closely tied to sustainability, but others use sustainability only as a marketing tactic to attract more attention. How do you think a sports organization can add sustainability as a culture instead of just making a few one-time actions in their activities?
That's a very good question. I think what we're realizing at the moment is, before, sports didn't really rely much on the environment to take place. With global warming, a lot of winter sports will actually rely, if there is snow, then they can do their event. In terms of heat waves, if the earth is cool enough, they can do their event. So I think the rules of play will change. And so I think at that moment, where sports organizations and international federations will really understand that the biggest criteria is whether the event can take place or not, which we're actually living for the very first time now.
Absolutely.
I think this mindset is definitely going to change from, well, actually, it's not a nice to do, but it's a must do mindset. And then, well, there's a couple of tools to know if the sports organizations are really doing it or not. And if they all speak the same language, the SDG language, and they all come to the same community, then it helps, of course.
Yeah.
And if I can add, and I mean, I'm Dutch of origin, so I have the excuse to sometimes make bold statements. But you see difference between non-profit sport organizations and private entities that run sport events who integrate it into their business model, where often non-for-profit, like international federations, are dependent on their elective model, the election of a board who is the decision-making authority, which is a different drive behind the development of the sport than when you have a business drive behind it. So that's also why I think you need to learn sometimes from each other, where one is more an elective political model, the other one is a business model. You can't copy paste, but you can learn from each other. And since we are kind of talking Lausanne, I think a lot of the things happening in Lausanne are more centered around the international federations and the model they have. But they, I think, can still learn and work on the culture within the federation to adapt some of the lessons they learn from the business without necessarily having the change in the culture of the federation. Yeah,
I think I really like the point you just made, Neil, about, the sport needs to continue. We need to be able, and the reality of that is probably going to be a big driver in the future. I think it kind of helps answer the questions that a couple of the others have added on to Michelle's comment about how do you make this practical, other than just being the financial benefits. It's actually the bigger picture of the sustainability of the sport. If you can't play it because of heat, then there's a bigger problem that we're all facing.
Yeah. And not long ago, there were bushfires, and that's only January. Yeah,
another follow-up question there to Michelle's from Laura. Thanks for the question. How can we have sustainability at the core? You mentioned a couple of times the tools. What are some of those tools that you're talking about that perhaps people can start tapping into?
Yeah, so if we look at the business, so BCorp, again, which can be used as a great framework for sports. BCorp, how it works is it ensures before companies start the process that within their statutes, sustainability is at their core. So, for instance, Lombard-Odier, one of the oldest banks in the world, had to change its statutes in front of its shareholders, which is a big step, and include sustainability within its core. So it starts from there, because the big problem with business and sports is as soon as you have a change of governance, then you start again, and then you have to convince again, and then you have to follow an agenda. But if you manage to put it at the core of your governance as your purpose, as your mission, as your vision, then it drives the company, and then it just builds on top. So then how you're going to define your strategy, what are you going to care about? So your community, your customers, the environment, your workforce, and for this, I do believe it all starts from good governance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I'm just going to emphasize also the difference between things like the SDG and the BCorp. For this sort of questions, BCorp is the tool to embed it in your organization. The SDG is a structure framework. It's not necessarily going to address this topic. It's a way to structure your initiatives. And I would probably say one key thing it will help you doing is if you're, for example, a water sport federation, it will help you identify certain areas because you cannot do all 17. You see a lot of federations picking the ones that are close to the core of their business. But just emphasizing that what Neil said with BCorp as a tool to really embed it in your strategy is what I would say as well. Yeah. So use the tools in the right way.
Okay. And so when you're talking about BCorp, like you're suggesting that there's a lot of available tools within their website, their framework. Where can people start to find this information?
Yeah. So I invite you all to, if you have some time these days at home, to go on their B Impact Assessment tool, which is free of use. And if you're interested in sustainability, whether it's throughout sports or your own business organization, have a play around. It's quite easy, but at the same time quite technical. And then you can evaluate your performance. And it's a great thing to play with. It's intuitive, it's online, it's community. And I think that's how it's brought ISO, for instance, to the next level, because there's less bureaucracy. It's constantly evolving. So one example, BCorps have committed to zero carbon by 2030. And out of the 3,000, there were more than 500 BCorps that have signed the pledge. In Switzerland, there's a lot of them. They don't know how to do it, but they're all going to go for it. And this is how the tool constantly adapts to the changing environment, which for ISO, for instance, is a lot less sexy and a lot less easy to adapt and to evolve within the next years to come.
Okay, that's great. So some good direction there. I've got another question here from Geordie. There's a thin line between being outspoken and promoting SDGs and being blamed for greenwashing. Any recommendations to get started on the right foot? It's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the current situation will take away a lot of greenwashing, because people have to go back to the core. And if in your federation or in your organization, you have been given some budget to do something, to get a nice picture on the website and do the greenwashing or the rainbow washing, whatever you want to call it, that's the first thing that will be cut when cuts needs to be made, because it doesn't really influence the core business. So it comes back to embed it into your core business, make choices. You see all the big corporates making choices for things that actually do connect with their business. So you measure it, you define concrete indicators, so that you don't only talk about having a nice picture on your website, but make it concrete with goals and measurable objectives. And again, we can't say it often enough, do the things that are connected to your core, because again, otherwise it will be a very, very tough job to defend it year after year to your board if it's just greenwashing.
Yeah, if I may add, Le Temps, which is our Swiss newspaper, has published a handbook on how to know very quickly organizations that are greenwashing. So it's a list of simple questions, and you're very right, Geert. One of the most important question is, so how do you measure the actions that you're putting out there? You know, are you setting objectives, targets that you want to reach, and show us your measurement? And I think if companies are reporting on their progress in a transparent and third-party verified basis, then it's a great way to start a conversation and to be able to compare different industries and different sectors.
And just probably one little thing to add is, don't be afraid to start small, or I would even say I recommend you to start small. I've worked with a few federations, and initially you see a swap from doing nothing to wanting to do everything. But the ones I think that who succeeded best were the ones who started with 5 things that they knew they could measure, because certain things are out of your control. And they picked 5 things and they said, like, okay, this is something where we have a certain influence. This is something where we have information to measure it. And we're going to do those 5 things first, and then learn some lessons, and then move on to the next thing. But don't start with 72 indicators on day one, because it's going to be, I mean, you won't be able to work on any of them. So you better do 5 things well than 72 things half.
Yeah, baby steps. That's a good question, because there's a nice follow-up question here from Sarah. She's saying, before COVID-19's crisis was difficult to convince event organizers to invest in sustainable activities, because sustainable merchandising is more expensive than normal one, those type of comments. So what can be the key or the turning point to convince them to invest in it? Obviously, sustainability is more expensive than the unsustainable way of managing things. Or is that perception? I'm going to throw that question.
So if I may use the example of merchandising, one of the things we're noticing with the current crisis is the return of the local economy. So whether it's food, whether it's a supply chain, or there's going to be a shift in a certain way to coming back to local economy, which is resulting in a lot of initiatives. We're seeing a lot of online farming, digital applications popping up, and we're looking at actually what the trends are. And so this is going to be a bit of a shift in terms of the pricing model, in terms of the supply chain model. So there's definitely going to be a before and after, and it's hard to say how the pricing is going to change, but definitely the society and the organizational model and the supply chain management will be influenced. And we could see some shifts in terms of pricing, which could potentially be one of the arguments. It's quite early to say so, but that's one example and a case study I wanted to throw in.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I was talking with a Chinese sport organization yesterday, where they are sort of starting to rebuild things post-Corona crisis. And what I saw there, like, they were asking, like, okay, how can we bring this back onto the agenda? because part of the organizations indeed says like, okay, let's drop this, where others see the opportunity now to say like, okay, we need to somehow rebuild our system. And actually society is more sensitive than ever to health, to social issues, to climate, etc., solidarity. So actually we want to be a front runner on this. We want to take the lead. We want to even take the opportunity that society is expecting us now to behave differently than we did before. So if we have to redesign things, we need to do it. And it's not it's the $100 question. I mean, it's one that is like needs a lot of thinking, and every business is different in that sense. Yeah. But it was interesting to see that these people in China were talking about like, okay, we are now in this situation. We want to be different than our competitors. We want to kind of connect to society, want to connect to our sponsors, to our suppliers. So we need to get this thing right, because we didn't get it right last time.
Yeah, good. Well, it's triggering by maybe some shift in behaviors. I mean, for all of us, in many different ways. There's a follow-up here from Olya. She's commenting that I think one of the biggest blocks to implementing meaningful sustainability strategies is our inability to quantify them, quantify the value of it, the return on investment. We all know that sustainability is good, it's important, but as mentioned by Sarah in her question below, it appears expensive. I guess a good question is, are there any tools that show that value or return on investment that B Corp have developed in your experience to date? Well,
for me, what I showed as a slide regarding the current financial crisis is a certain argument to say, well, you know, in the financial market, the ones that have gone towards inclusion of ESG criteria are the ones that are more resilient. Now, I think indeed, in terms of measuring your impact and the return on investment, of course, there's a lot of economic impacts, which are currently going towards integrating more sustainability. I still think there's a field of research to really know, you know, what is the return on investment of all the initiatives and impact initiatives that big sports organizations are running out there. But I guess it's the same questions the UN addresses itself, and a lot of NGOs are addressing themselves. And I do believe that this question has been addressed, but will be even more addressed in the years to come, because the problem is, as the former question was, some will cut budgets, and they will often cut budgets on what they think is less of a priority. And others will be the egos, they will reboot, restart, and some will need convincing. And I do believe now is the opportunity to actually really showcase when you're injecting, you know, $1 in an impact initiative that you want to foster, what's going to be the return on investment. B Corp is actually out there, and yeah, study their business model, study how their performance is going, but it's definitely, they're definitely at the forefront.
Just quickly adding there, to be honest, it's not entering 3 numbers and you get a return on investment. It requires work. If you will look at the B Corp tool, you need to dedicate time. You need to find information about how you run your organization in order to get a picture on that. It's an investment that you make. So it's not something that comes easily by just like, okay, what's my ROI? Well, based upon ABC, boom, this is the number. That I think is one thing just to be clear about. It does require work. Secondly, I think it's also something that pointing to people like Neil and me on the call, like often we have been considered as activists, just championing and saying like, thou shalt do this and this. And that is something that is changing, and that should change as well, to become more strategists, to be part of the discussion and to think and to understand how is this sport organization being run? What is really, who are their main clients? What is their objective? Their objective is to grow their sport. It's not necessary to save the globe. So also those who are kind of advising on this and talking about this also should, I think, make 2 steps forward to be closer to the business than just throwing trees or throwing like activist language at sports. I think it comes from both ways.
It comes back to the discussion going from shareholder value, which is very easy to quantify, to stakeholder value, which is a bit harder to quantify. But if you have a better stakeholder engagement, that's where you know you're going to be out there.
Great. Got time for a couple more questions. There's a couple of good ones here. There's a great one here. How can athletes from Nyaniso, apologies if I get your name wrong, how can athletes play a role in educating fans about climate change in sport? Great question, because it is ultimately all about the athletes.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I would take the example of Daniel Yule, for those who know him. He comes from nearly my village, and he's now an ambassador of Protecto Winters. So Daniel Yule was finding quite a lot of difficulties because, you know, as an athlete, he flies around the world. He even takes the helicopter to gain time between his training session and his rest session. But at the same time, he's one of the leading ambassadors who took the voice against his president who denied climate change. And his difficulties are actually being to be an ambassador at the same time having an impact. So there's a need to provide support to them to know how their carbon footprint is being calculated, to be still able to have a voice out there, and to still be leaders in some of the actions they're taking in order to reduce their carbon. But I think if they show authenticity, if they measure, if they reduce, and they just show progress, because we all have an impact. So none of us is green. But if you show that you're doing progress and you're going towards a goal, and I think that's why athletes are taking that lead, and some are going even more drastic. I don't know if you have examples here to share.
Yeah, I mean, I can share one concrete example. I mean, and a general, more an obvious comment to that is, I met with a football player recently, and she had 500,000 followers on Twitter. I have probably 16 or 17, give or take. There's one, if you want to reach bigger groups, that's a great voice, great audience. A concrete example that I can give is Morten Torsby, who plays for Sampdoria, who works with as ambassador for SandSI. He recently flew with the Norwegian team for a trip from Norway, where he plays a national team, to Malta, and they fly business class. And he stood up and said, like, I can't fly economy class for a 2-hour flight because I know how much the difference is in when it comes to my footprint. Just making that statement, and media being there saying, like, why do you give up your personal comfort for this sort of things? He said, because it matters, because small things do matter. So I think people like him and media picking up on that sort of examples can have a much bigger impact than when you try to do it yourself or as a regulatory body.
Yeah, okay. So some great tips there on looking at ways we can engage the athlete community in supporting, you know, what is ultimately their event. You know, as event organizers or as event technologists, whatever our contribution is as part of that sport worker community.
And ask them, they want to be involved. They want to do something. So simply ask them the question, how can we involve you? How can we engage you? Most of you have athletes commissions. Is this on the agenda? Otherwise, you probably should, and let them say what they think matters and how they can be involved.
If I can take a parallel to the current situation, Sébastien Reichenbach, also a close friend who's training for the Tour de France, was one of the first to drop his bike currently because he didn't want to injure himself, and he showed the example to the local cycling community. So if he stops cycling, you know, who am I to continue cycling during the Corona crisis? So he's currently posting every day what he's doing at home to stay fit, because he might still compete in the Tour de France, also the World Championships, which will be on his own playground. So if he takes that risk to show leadership and stay at home, this has such a powerful tool amongst the community, likewise for sustainability, likewise for the environment. But at the same time, they have to be role models, because they cannot speak on one side and act differently on the other.
Yeah. Great. Look, we've got 30 seconds of time left on the call. We kind of had 20 minutes. So, look, I just want to say Great presentation, great conversation, really important conversation, incredibly relevant. It has been relevant for a long time, but it feels like now, as you've highlighted in a couple of your comments, that now might be the opportunity to get a little bit more focus and start thinking of ways that we can influence those behaviors. I'm really grateful for the links. We will be sharing them post presentation today. We'll put them into the posts, and so you'll be able to look up and look at ways with the B Corp. Geert, anything finally you just want to add to today?
No, I think now is the time to make a difference. So use the tools that are there. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, and learn from others. Great.
Thanks, Geert. And Neil, any last comments?
Yeah, be an eagle. It's maybe, as I was saying before, our last and final opportunity to change, and now's the moment.
Fantastic. Okay, so I want to say thank you on behalf of SportWorks for joining us this morning for our SportWorks talks. We will be sharing this out. It will go out on our YouTube channel as well, and through all our social media channels. And we'll be passing on that information, really valuable information from Geert and Neil. Thanks, guys. And I wish you all a great day, and please stay safe. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, SportWorks.
Thank you very much.